I never thought I'd share this story, but I need to talk it out. My name is Robin, I'm 45 years old. I have a fairly successful restaurant in the city that I built from scratch, and I am sincerely proud that it has not only become a place where people come to enjoy good food, atmosphere, and warm meetings, but also that it was here, 5 years ago, that the story that turned my life upside down began. I would like to say that this story is about love, hope, and happiness, but now that everything has already happened, I see it very differently. James, not my real name, of course, came into my life at a time when the restaurant needed a little renovation. I hired him as a contractor to refresh the interior, redo the lighting, and replace furniture in some rooms. He was charming, worked quickly and enthusiastically, always found a common language with me and his eyes. Those warm, penetrating eyes, which seemed to reflect something real, reliable, something I wanted to believe in. We started talking more and more, and every day he told me stories about his projects, about his life, and then about his daughter, Lisa. She was 13 at the time, and he raised her alone. Her mother, as he said, lost custody due to alcohol problems, and he did everything so that Lisa would not feel deprived. At some point, I found myself looking forward to our conversations with impatience, that I smile when I see him, that my thoughts come back to him more and more often, even after work. When he first suggested we meet outside of work, just for coffee, I didn't even hesitate. That coffee turned into dinner, dinner turned into a date, and before I could realize that things had gone so far, we were already talking about the future, about family, and how great it would be if Lisa got the mother she never had. Everything was almost too perfect to be true. James was caring, attentive, and protective of me. Lisa turned out to be a sweet and friendly girl, and I felt like I'd finally found what I'd always missed. A year after we met, we got married, and James and Lisa moved into my house. I threw myself into my new role, wanting to become not just a good stepmother for Lisa, but the person she can always rely on. We cooked together, had small parties, went shopping, I tried to guess her desires, bought her clothes, paid for family vacations, tried to give her the life she dreamed of when she was a teenager. Yes, she dated her mother from time to time, and although the thought made me uneasy, I didn't express my opinion out loud. James insisted that Lisa needed to know that her mother still loved her, that she was trying to improve, that no matter what, she remained her birth mother. I tried to figure it out, but doubt still settled inside me, especially after one meeting at a school event. I saw her mother, and she didn't look sober. There was something about the way she swayed in place, the unfocused look in her eyes, the way her movements seemed unnaturally slow and slippery, that made my heart sink. But I didn't say anything. After all, who am I to interfere? I'm just a stepmother, and maybe it was just my imagination, because no one else seemed to be paying attention. If only I had known then what I know now. The years flew by, and before I realized it, Lisa turned 18. She finally matured, turning into a beautiful but very anxious girl. A few weeks before her birthday, she walked around the house, nervously biting her lips, pulling her hair, repeating every now and then, "What if something goes wrong? And if no one comes? What if the party is terrible?" I could see how she was winding herself up, how her worries were growing in her like a weed, and one evening, when her anxious thoughts seemed to have reached a peak, I just went up and hugged her. "It's going to be okay, really," I said, stroking her back. "Actually, I have an idea. Why don't we have a party at the restaurant? I can book the best tables, everything will be top-notch." I saw her eyes flash with joy, her lips twitch in anticipation, and at that moment it seemed to me that I had done the right thing. Lisa has always loved my restaurant. It has become one of the most popular places in the city, and she certainly liked the idea of showing it to her friends. "Oh my God, my Instagram is going to be explosive!" she exclaimed, already pulling out her phone. "Everyone at school will be so jealous." I threw myself into the preparation. I wanted everything to be absolutely perfect, so that this day would be truly special for Lisa, unforgettable, magical, the way an 18th birthday should be. I sincerely hoped that she would remember it as one of the happiest moments of her life, and so I thought over every detail: the flowers, the setting, the music, the lighting, the menu, even the little things like the candles on the cake and their exact shade. I took her shopping to choose a dress, and when we found it, a gorgeous, deep blue color that perfectly accentuated her figure, with a soft shimmer of fabric that made her look really grown up, I almost burst into tears right in the fitting room. I looked at her dazzling reflection in the mirror, and suddenly realized that in front of me was no longer the girl with whom I once learned how to bake cupcakes in my kitchen, not the awkward teenager who cowered in the corner when I first entered her life, but a young woman, full of hopes, worries, dreams. "How many people are you going to invite?" I asked her when we were discussing the details of the party one evening, over a cup of tea, amid the cozy crackle of candles. She hesitated for a moment, looked away, and fiddled with a paper napkin, as if thinking about something. About 30 people, she finally replied uncertainly. "Great. Then can you make me a guest list? I want to make sure that we have enough places and food for everyone." Lisa wrinkled her nose, as she always did when something annoyed her. "Oh, I didn't write anything, just plan for 30 people, that's enough." Looking back, I should have insisted on this list, asked her in more detail, found out who exactly she was waiting for, but at that moment I was too keen to arrange everything perfectly. I just nodded and walked on. The day of the party arrived, and the restaurant was shining. The tables were decorated with fresh flowers and elegant candles, the dishes sparkled, and the delicious aroma of fine dishes wafted in the air. Everything was exactly as I imagined it to be, flawless, luxurious, worthy of Lisa. She looked amazing in her new dress, confident, happy, surrounded by friends who were laughing, taking pictures, chatting, filling the hall with lively energy. James' relatives also came, raising glasses to her adulthood. Waiters deftly scurried between the tables, carrying treats and drinks. Camera flashes flashed everywhere, pictures for social networks, selfies, videos, short stories that were already spreading on the internet at that moment. And suddenly she came in. I recognized her immediately. Although several years have passed, she has not changed, or rather, she has changed for the worse. Even in spite of the soft twilight of the restaurant, the sounds of fun, and the general brilliance of what was happening, I saw her sway slightly, her eyes glaze over, and the corners of her lips tremble in an unnatural attempt at a smile. She was obviously drunk. "Happy birthday," she drawled, her voice pierced the hall, making people turn around. I was sitting next to Lisa when her mother stumbled over to our table. The look she gave me was so full of hatred that it turned my insides cold. She looked at me as if I was something stuck to her shoe, something insignificant, disgusting, superfluous. "Get up," she demanded, waving her hand in my direction. "This is my place. I'm her real mother, not you." I felt Lisa shrink next to me, her breathing quickened, her fingers clutched convulsively at the edge of the tablecloth. "There are plenty of empty seats here," I said, trying to sound calm and reasonable. "There are other guests at the next table, you can join them." "No." Her voice rose to a scream, harsh and broken. "This is my place. You have to get out of here. Who do you think you are?" I looked at James, hoping that he would intervene, that he would say something, but he just sat blushing, staring at his plate, as if studying something extremely important. I took a deep breath, trying to suppress my growing irritation, because it was Lisa's day, and I wasn't going to let anyone, not even her birth mother, ruin it. "Let's get this straight," I said, looking her straight in the eye. "You have two options. You sit down at another table and behave yourself, or I call security and they take you out of the restaurant." Her face was contorted with rage. "Oh, listen, Miss Money decides everything." She swayed, almost falling, grabbing the edge of the table to keep her balance. "Do you think you can buy them all? What can you buy my husband, my daughter's love?" I felt the eyes of the guests fixed on me. There was a tense silence in the hall, except for the sound of a phone somewhere in the corner. Someone was clearly recording a video. I saw my regular customers at the neighboring tables. Someone was trying to look at their plate. Someone was tensely frozen with a glass in their hand, but I felt that they were all hearing every word, every movement, every vibration of the air, filled with tension and scandal, which was only gaining momentum. My staff hesitantly stood on the edge of the hall, looking at me, waiting for the signal, ready to intervene if I wanted to, but so far they did not dare to make the first move, because it was not just a drunken brawler, not just a random troublemaker, it was Lisa's mother. You just came into our lives, into this world with its fancy restaurant, its big house, its money, she continued, her voice getting louder, more hysterical, taking on a desperate, insane note. Do you think you can replace me? Do you think that if you have money, you can just cut me out of my daughter's life? Well, guess what you can't do? You can't take my family away from me. Before I could say anything, before any of the guests could react, she grabbed a plate of food and threw it violently to the floor. The crash of broken porcelain echoed off the walls of the restaurant, causing a silence so thick that it seemed as if the air in the hall had frozen for a moment. And now the second plate flies after it, and another, and another. Pieces of porcelain fly across the floor, colorful food stains spread out on the expensive carpet that I laid just a month ago, in the vain hope of making the atmosphere even more cozy. I took a quick glance at the guards, and a barely perceptible nod was enough of a signal to them. They moved smoothly, professionally, as they had been taught. "Ma'am, it's time for you to leave," the head of security said firmly, carefully but confidently taking her hand. She jerked, tried to pull her hand away, but her movements were too clumsy, too drunk, and the guards effortlessly led her to the exit. "Let me go," she screamed, rocking like a stormy sea. "This is my daughter. This is my family. And you?" Her eyes darted to me again, filled with anger, hatred, and something else, something like hopelessness. "You're just someone else's, and you'll never take her away from me." Her screams echoed down the hallway until the door finally slammed shut behind her. In the silence that followed, I suddenly realized that I had been holding my breath, and now I exhaled with an effort. I stood up, trying to look calm, as if nothing had happened, as if it was just a minor episode, an annoying misunderstanding, nothing more. I put on my most convincing smile, even though my stomach was clenching, and said, "I'm so sorry to bother you. Please, everyone enjoy the meal." Some of my regular customers nodded, accepting the situation with that cold indifference that rich people know how to show in moments of someone else's shame. After a few minutes, they returned to their conversations, but at the tables where Lisa's friends and relatives were sitting, everything was different. There were always whispers, quiet remarks thrown surreptitiously, stealthily. I saw them glancing at Lisa, at James, at me. I knew that this story would spread all over social media by the morning, that it would be discussed at breakfast in schools, and that parent chats would be full of condemnatory messages. Lisa sat there, pale as a ghost, moving her fork around her plate, as if completely unaware that there was food in front of her. Her beautiful blue dress, in which she had looked mature and confident a few hours ago, now seemed too big, too childish, as if it emphasized her vulnerability. She dreamed of the perfect party, of a moment that she would remember forever, of a picture that would be worthy of Instagram, but this day turned into a nightmare. "I have a headache," she finally whispered. Her voice was soft, almost weightless. "Can we go home?" I nodded. After that, the party quickly came to an end. The guests got up from their tables one by one, politely apologized, and said thanks, but I could hear them whispering as they left. "Poor Lisa. Have you seen her mother? Oh my God, what a nightmare. Can you imagine what she went through?" When we got home, Lisa wordlessly went straight to her room, closing the door behind her so quickly that I didn't even have time to speak. I followed him up and knocked. "Lisa, dear, can we talk?" There was a moment of silence, Then her voice, as tired as her face at the party. I just need to be alone right now. I stood in front of the closed door, feeling a growing pressure in my chest, and then slowly went downstairs, where I found James in the kitchen, staring into a glass of whiskey. Did you invite her? I asked quietly. He didn't even look up. No, I would never do that. And then I understood. Everything fell into place. Lisa invited her mother herself. Despite everything that had happened, despite her drunkenness, despite the trial, despite the loss of custody, despite the pain, despite past mistakes, she wanted her mother to be by her side on this day. The next morning, when I woke up, the house was quiet. Lisa was already sitting in the kitchen, her eyes fixed on a bowl of cereal, her face haggard, as if she hadn't slept all night. She slid into her usual chair, not looking at James or me. How are you feeling, honey? I asked, trying to make my voice sound light, normal. Okay, she muttered, not looking up. And that was it. One word. The following days were like living in a haunted house, where something subtly changed, where the walls seemed to absorb all the pain and tension, and the air became viscous, heavy, filled with unspoken words, muffled sighs and shunned glances. Lisa, my once chatty, cheerful, laughing stepdaughter, was now turning into a stranger, a shadow of herself, a ghostly reminder of the girl I used to bake cupcakes with in the kitchen, whom I used to go shopping with, whom I laughed until I cried, and what scared me the most. Not that she was shutting herself in, but that she was shutting herself off from me, as if I were a threat, an enemy, the cause of her pain. When I entered the room where she was talking to James, she would immediately fall silent, as if someone had pressed the mute button, and a silence filled with dull accusation hung between us, making our relationship fragile, like thin ice that cracks underfoot as soon as you take a step. One night, when Lisa went to bed, I tried to talk to James. We were sitting in the kitchen, me clutching a cooling cup of tea, he with his usual glass of whiskey, which had become his constant companion in recent days, and I waited for a moment and carefully said, "Don't you think we need to do something? Maybe I should talk to her, convince her to turn to someone who will help her sort out her feelings?" James just sighed wearily, waving me off, as if I had suggested something insignificant, not worth attention. She just needs time. She's going through what happened, realizing how it all turned out. Give her some space. But I saw that it wasn't just awareness, it wasn't just an attempt to get through an unpleasant moment, it was pain that was deeply embedded, resentment that was growing inside her, and fear that if we didn't do something, it would lead to consequences that could no longer be avoided. Despite the tension in the house, we still went to Lisa's graduation. I was sitting in the audience next to James, clapping my hands until they blushed, when her name was announced, when she came up on stage in a robe and a square cap, when she looked at us for a moment and smiled, and in that brief moment I thought that maybe things would really get better, that maybe I needn't have worried, that maybe it wasn't as bad as I thought. After the ceremony, we returned home, and I wanted to make this evening really warm, really happy, at least for a few hours to erase all the unpleasant memories, so I ordered all her favorite dishes from the restaurant, creamy risotto with mushrooms, crispy miniature crab cutlets that she always stole from the kitchen when she came in, to my place of work, and even that ridiculous chocolate cake that took 3 days to make, but which she adored. The house was filled with voices and laughter. Lisa's friends were discussing college plans, upcoming vacations, and for a while I relaxed, allowed myself to believe that everything was really going for the best, that we had survived the crisis. And then her phone rang. She got up, went out into the hallway, answered, and when she returned a few minutes later, her face was focused, determined, tense, as if she had made some important decision for herself. She came up to me for the first time in all these days, on her own, without coercion, without my first step. "Mom's here," she said calmly. "She wants to congratulate me on graduation." My stomach dropped. No, I shook my head, remembering the night of her birthday, the nightmare that had ruined everything, feeling panic rising inside. "Lisa, think about what happened last time. She came in drunk, made a scene, broke the dishes, she ruined the evening. It was your fault. She interrupted sharply, her voice, usually so restrained these days, soaring to a scream. None of this would have happened if you'd just given up your seat to her. She's my real mom. You should have just left. I froze. All those days of silence, all her distant looks, evasive answers, tense conversations, it was all because she blamed me. Not his mother, not her drunkenness, not her behavior, but me. I slowly turned to James, hoping that now, finally, he would intervene, that he would show himself as a father, that he would tell Lisa the truth, that he would explain that her mother had destroyed everything herself, that she had destroyed the chance to be with her daughter with her own hands. But he, as then, in the restaurant, just sat there. He stared at the floor, staring at the toes of his shoes as if they were the most important sight in his life, as if they held the key to the universe. The same deafening silence. The same cowardly retreat. And something inside me broke. 5 years. For 5 years I tried to be the perfect stepmother, caring, understanding, patient, forgiving, yielding. For 5 years I walked on thin ice, trying not to hurt other people's wounds, not to upset the delicate balance. For 5 years I justified other people's behavior, and in the end I turned out to be guilty of trying to help. I took a step forward, looking straight into Lisa's eyes, and said, "Listen to me carefully. This is my restaurant. I organized this whole party for you. I bought you the dress you dreamed of. I did everything I could to make this day perfect for you. And your mother, she came drunk, made a scene, broke plates, tore up the restaurant, humiliated you in front of your friends, in front of my guests, in front of the whole city. She didn't even bring you a present, Lisa. All she brought with her was chaos, shame, and embarrassment." I saw her face contort in anger, as something like rage flashed in her eyes, like a boiling volcano ready to burst, smash everything around, crush me, and the next moment she threw her hands up, screaming so loudly that everyone in the living room shuddered. "Oh, that's it." Her voice rang through the silence. "You always think about money, don't you? I paid for it, I bought it, I organized everything. Do you think that because you have money, you can control everyone and everything?" I didn't have time to answer. She abruptly turned to her friends, who had been shifting uncomfortably from one foot to the other, obviously not knowing where to put themselves, how to avoid this conversation, how to pretend that they were not here, that this was not happening. "My real mom will be here soon," she announced with a bitter laugh, folding her arms over her chest and giving me a look full of contempt. "It will be great to finally have a normal person here." Her hand shot up into the air, pointing at me as if I were something dirty, something shameful, something that should be destroyed, crossed out, crushed. I forced myself to exhale, holding back the anger that was already boiling inside, holding back the pain that was tearing through my chest, holding back the part of me that screamed that I didn't deserve this, that I hadn't done anything wrong. "Your mother will not enter this house," I said firmly, every syllable of my voice saturated with confidence, even despite the trembling I felt inside. "Not after what happened in the restaurant." And then Lisa completely lost control. Her face turned red, her fingers curled into fists, her breathing became ragged, and then she screamed, so loudly that the walls seemed to shake with her rage. "You're not my mother." "Stop it," she screamed, and there was no doubt in her voice. "You're nothing to me. You're nobody. Who do you think you are to tell me what to do? Don't stick your dirty nose in my business. You're just some woman my dad married for her money." The silence that followed was deafening. I saw her friends look down, as someone stared at the phone screen, frantically scrolling through the social media feed, as others stared at the ceiling, as if it had become the most interesting object in the room for them right now. No one dared to intervene, no one knew what to say, no one wanted to be a part of this disgrace. Lisa turned to her friends, and there was a venomous mockery in her voice. "Let's get out of here. I don't want to celebrate. Not in her house, anyway." She emphasized this, her, as if it was about something shameful, dirty, something that you want to get rid of. And they all, as if on cue, quickly headed for the exit. Not one of them looked me in the eye. Not one tried to soften the blow. No one said, "Lisa, you're overreacting." Nobody. The door slammed shut behind them with a loud bang, making the glass in the windows rattle. I was standing in my living room, surrounded by half-eaten food, discarded plates, crumpled napkins, and the remnants of a party that should never have ended like this, and I felt like I'd been hit by a truck. And then I slowly turned to James. He's definitely going to say something now. Now he's definitely going to stand up for me, support me, tell Lisa that she's gone too far. He cleared his throat. "You had no right to throw a house and money in her face." His voice was cold, hard, distant. "You didn't have to remind her that this is your house, your money, that you paid for everything." It was low. I stared at him, feeling like everything inside was slowly sinking into some kind of endless void, where there was no pain, no anger, no despair, just the icy realization that I might never have known him. "Are you kidding me?" I asked slowly, as if trying to process his words, to make sure that I had heard correctly. "Where were you when your ex-wife was throwing plates at my restaurant? Where were you just now when your daughter was shouting insults in my face in front of everyone?" James looked away, but I didn't let him go into that familiar silence, that comfortable inactivity he always hid in. "You're an adult," he snapped, clenching his fists. "You should have known better than to argue with a teenager." I laughed. Short, dull, joyless. "And you should have known better than to bury your head in the sand like a coward," I said, glaring at him. "But that's exactly what you're doing, isn't it? You just sit there and be silent when your ex-wife and your daughter treat me like trash." I could see his face turning dark red. He clenched his jaw, his nostrils flared. He was furious, but not at Lisa, not at her mother, but at me. Without another word, he turned around and stormed upstairs, slamming the door behind him. I heard the door of the guest room slam a few minutes after he left, and not knowing what exactly I was expecting, I remained sitting downstairs, clutching a cup of cold tea, listening to how deathly silence gradually reigned in the house, filled with hidden accusations, unspoken words, and echoes of someone else's disappointment. The next morning, breakfast was like sitting in a morgue. James was silently pushing eggs around his plate, as if trying to unravel the mysteries of the universe in it, without looking up and without saying a word. I was about to get up, grab my cup and leave, and the door opened and Lisa literally stumbled into the kitchen. She was still in the same clothes she'd worn to the prom. Her hair was in a tangled, chaotic tangle, and the dark smudges of mascara under her eyes made her face look painfully pale. But what hit her the most was the pungent smell of alcohol mixed with night stale, cigarettes, and something else. That's what made me tense up. I looked at James, waiting for him to say something, to raise his voice, to at least ask his daughter why she came home drunk at 9 in the morning, but he just continued to study his plate, as if he had found in these eggs the answers to all the questions of life. "Where were you all night?" I asked, trying to keep my voice level, neutral, calm, despite the anger that was already bubbling inside me. Lisa turned to me, her eyes reddened, her gaze cloudy, filled with contempt. "None of your business," she muttered, sinking heavily into a chair. "You're not my mother. You're nobody. It's just an empty space that takes up space in this house." And then, without even waiting for my reaction, she got up, staggered, and, dragging her feet, headed upstairs, leaving behind a trail of alcohol, cheap perfume, and the burning cold that emanated from her words. I looked at James, but, as always, he just remained silent. I was starting to think that his superpower was silence. The next week felt like living in a house with a particularly vengeful ghost. Lisa didn't talk to me directly. She talked about me as if I were a piece of furniture, part of an interior, something that existed but had no right to a voice. "Dad," she said, pointing at me as if I were an unnecessary object in the corner, "can you ask your wife to pass me the salt?" Or she would come into the room, glance at me with an indifferent gaze, and say to James, "This woman is standing in my way. Wait until she leaves." I was silent. I was watching. I wasn't going to prove anything anymore. I was no longer going to try to earn her respect, her love, her recognition, because I finally saw the truth. I had never been a family to her. All this accumulated, day after day, like thunderclouds swelling on the horizon, until finally a storm broke out. It was Sunday, and James and I were having dinner in silence again, each with our own thoughts, each in our own shell of silent annoyance, when Lisa burst into the dining room, waving a white envelope as if there was something incredible in it. "Dad!" "Stop it," she cried, her voice ringing with delight. I got in. She was spinning around the room, her eyes sparkling, her face glowing with happiness. I got accepted to Berkeley. To the school of my dreams. I watched as she rushed to James, as he hugged her, as they laughed, beamed, were absolutely absorbed in this moment, and I really, sincerely wanted to be happy for her. But then Lisa turned to me and, with a malicious smile, said, "Tell your wife that it's time for her to pay for my training." Something inside me snapped. I smiled. It wasn't a kind smile. "No," I said calmly, with restraint, but there was more firmness in those words than in anything I had ever said to her before. "I won't pay for your college." I saw her face contort in shock for a second. "What? You've made it clear that I'm not your mother. That I'm nobody. That I'm just an empty place. Well, the wallet of this empty place is closed. Why don't you ask your real mother to pay for college?" Her face turned frighteningly red, and the next moment she screamed, "You're a vindictive bitch." Her voice was shaking, and tears were streaming down her cheeks. "You're doing this to punish me. You're just mean, cruel, you. I looked at her and felt a strange, almost painful calmness. She screamed, her words were like lashes, but I suddenly realized that it no longer concerned me. It's like watching a hurricane through thick glass. You see the chaos, but it can no longer affect you. "Dad!" Lisa turned to James, grabbing his arm, her voice filled with hysteria. "Make her pay. She has to pay. Tell her." James cleared his throat and, using that patronizing tone I've long learned to hate, said, "Honey, stop joking. You know you have to pay for her tuition." I slowly turned to him, and at that moment it became very clear to me that I could no longer stay in this house. I pushed back my chair and stood up, feeling everything boiling inside, but keeping it boiling under a tight lid of icy calm. I made it clear that I was not going to pay tens of thousands of dollars for the education of a man who had been telling me for weeks that I was nobody to him, who treated me as if I didn't even deserve to be in this house, who looked at me with contempt, as if I was not a person, but just a source of convenience, money, resources. I've invested 5 years of my life in Lisa, my patience, care, and love, but if in the end I'm just an empty place for her, then my wallet is also an empty place now. I turned around and left the dining room without waiting for a reaction, but it followed immediately. I heard Lisa jump up from her seat, stamp her foot, and shout after her, "You have no right." I kept walking up the stairs, not even slowing down, not even looking back, and a real storm broke out behind me. I could hear the clatter of dishes. Judging by the sound, the plates were scattering on the floor one after another. The chairs screeched on the parquet floor, as if they were being thrown or pushed away with force. Theatrical sobs, which could easily be mistaken for real ones, echoed off the walls as I climbed the stairs. Both mother and daughter, I thought gloomily, closing the bedroom door behind me. I sat on the bed with my arms crossed over my chest and just listened to the chaos below gradually subside. I knew it wasn't over yet. I knew that James would not leave everything as it was, that, as always, he would try to play his part in this protracted performance, in which he was assigned the role of a good-natured peacemaker who always finds himself on the side of the one who screams the loudest and hits the plates the hardest. I was not mistaken. About 30 minutes later, my bedroom door was abruptly flung open, and James stormed inside, his face flushed with anger, his fists clenched, and his breathing labored, which he was clearly trying to control. "I feel bad about all this," he spat out, as if the words were burning his tongue. "I'm so tired of your games, of your coldness, of this stupid stubbornness. You have to grow up and pay for Lisa's tuition." I looked at him calmly from where I was sitting on our bed. "No. You and your ex-wife can figure out how to pay for Berkeley," I replied in a flat voice. "I'm sure you two will figure something out." James started pacing the room like an angry animal in a cage, glaring at me every now and then. "You're being selfish," he said, glaring at me. "She's just a teenager. For God's sake, Robin, you're an adult here. You need to be above that." I looked at him and suddenly realized that I had heard it 1,000 times. "Be above it, be generous, she's still a child, she didn't mean to offend you, you're an adult, you have to understand." Over and over, like an old record, the same excuses, the same expectations, that I would smile, accept everything as it is, nod and open my wallet while Lisa continued to treat me like trash. "A teenager who's old enough to know how to handle people," I said softly. "A teenager who made it very clear how he feels about me. Why should I invest in her future if she has shown me nothing but contempt?" James stopped abruptly and turned to me, his gaze heavy, cold, alien. "Okay," he said, straightening up. "Then let me simplify the situation for you. Either you pay for Lisa's education, or I'm filing for divorce." He clearly expected me to burst into tears, that I would beg him not to leave, that I would immediately give in, try to make amends, try to explain that everything was not the way he thought, that I was just too depressed, too tired, too. But I didn't do any of that. I shrugged my shoulders. "Okay. A divorce is a divorce." His face instantly changed. He opened his mouth, then closed it. Then he opened it again, but he couldn't get a word out. He hadn't expected this. He was counting on panic, on tears, on persuasion. He thought I would panic and run to save what had long since ceased to be a marriage. "I'll call my lawyer first thing tomorrow morning," I added evenly. "In the meantime, you and Lisa can start looking for a new place to live." James stood rooted to the spot, staring at me as if seeing me for the first time in his life, as if all this time he thought he knew me, and now suddenly realized that it was all an illusion. Finally, without saying another word, he turned and left the room, quietly closing the door behind him. The next morning, when I came downstairs, James and Lisa were already sitting at the dining table, waiting for me, as if it were some kind of ridiculous ambush. The scene was played out perfectly, Lisa with reddened eyes, with bitten lip, with the look of an innocent, deeply repentant girl, James with the expression of a worried but patient father, ready for negotiations, and as soon as I took a step into the room, he smiled, the same smile that I once found warm, but now she saw it only as manipulation. "Honey," he began in a soft voice that carried an artificial benevolence. We all had the opportunity to calm down and think. Lisa nodded vigorously, like a well-trained doll. "We all overreacted yesterday," she added, and her voice was so sweet it sounded like sticky, sugary syrup. I looked at them and realized that this ambush was the last attempt to return me to my former scheme, to that game where I had to be comfortable, accommodating, where I could be used, when my wallet should always be open, and my feelings were irrelevant. But I wasn't playing by those rules anymore. I stood in the doorway, feeling a strange, unexpected sense of clarity fill me, penetrate into the very depths of consciousness, blurring the last remnants of doubt, like a thick fog dispersed by the first ray of sunlight. I looked at them and really saw them for who they really were, without rose-colored glasses, without excuses, without trying to convince myself that somewhere deep inside they still love, appreciate, and respect me. James continued to speak, using the same reasonable tone that he turned on whenever he wanted to achieve something, The same voice that he thought sounded sane, logical, convincing, but now it seemed empty, mechanical, lifeless to me. "Robin, families fight, but they also make up," he said, leaning toward me like a parent explaining something to a moody child. "And since you were the one who escalated the college situation, it would be very generous if you took the first step towards reconciliation." I heard Lisa's head snap up, her eyes lit up with hope, her lips twitched in a smile that was too forced, too artificial to be real. "Yes," she said with feigned enthusiasm. "If you help with the tuition fees, it would show that you really regret and want to fix everything." I almost laughed. Did they really think they could manipulate me so easily? What if they pretended to be remorseful, rehearsed a few phrases about family, pretended to be those who just overreacted, and I would immediately forget everything that happened? That I just needed to feel guilty, needed to play the comfortable, accommodating, generous stepmother again, whose only role is to pay for other people's mistakes over and over again? I took out my phone and, without hiding my grin, said, "Actually, I've already taken the first step. I'm out of the game." Lisa blinked, and James frowned. "What do you mean?" "I just got off the phone with my lawyer. The divorce papers will be ready by noon." The changes in their expressions were instantaneous, almost caricatured. Lisa's smile disappeared, replaced by shock. Her lips parted as if she was trying to say something, but could not find the words. James's face distorted, filled with a familiar shade of anger, rage, impotent anger, and at that moment I suddenly felt so light, as calm as I haven't felt in years. I turned to Lisa, letting every word come out clearly, slowly, without a shadow of hesitation. "You will no longer have to endure the interference of your non-mother in your life. Isn't that what you wanted?" Lisa burst into tears, but this time they were real, not calculated, not artificially caused, not intended to soften me, to bring me back into the trap of guilt and pity. But I didn't care. I'm tired of being manipulated by teenage tears. James jumped up from his seat so abruptly that his chair fell to the floor with a crash. He didn't say a word, he just turned around and rushed upstairs, slamming doors, pulling drawers noisily, ripping things off hangers, and soon Lisa joined him. Their footsteps stomped through the house like hammer blows, but I didn't go after them, didn't try to stop them, didn't try to say the last word. No more manipulative speech. No more fake apologies. Only the sound of suitcases being filled and doors slamming. I thought that would be the end of it. I was wrong. The messages started that evening. First, from James, "We all said things that we regret. Let's talk about it like adults." Then from Lisa, "I'm sorry if I hurt your feelings, but you're being very unfair about college." I didn't respond. Then they became even more rude, angrier, and tougher. "You're destroying this family with your stubbornness. I hope you're happy being alone with your money. You'll regret it when you get old and have no one." But I didn't. The divorce was quick thanks to the prenuptial agreement that I insisted we sign before the wedding. James tried to challenge it, of course, but my lawyer stopped it in the bud. He didn't get a cent, not from the restaurant's profits, not from my savings, not from what I've been investing my time and energy in all these years. Sometimes I hear about them from mutual friends. They say they live in a small rented apartment on the other side of the city. Lisa couldn't afford Berkeley, she's working somewhere in a mall, and James is trying to revive his contracting business, but things don't seem to be going well. I'm not gloating. I just don't think about them anymore. I redid the house after they left, threw out all the furniture that reminded me of them, changed the curtains, repainted the walls, redid the layout. Now this place seems bigger, lighter, freer. Or maybe it's just that I'm finally free from the severity of trying to buy love from people who were only interested in selling.